Hello everyone, it's 1 p.m. Eastern, and that means it's time to begin another of our monthly CoCoRaHS Weather Talk webinars. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Henry Regis, and running the technical side of our program is our own Noah Newman. We're coming to you live from the Colorado Climate Center here at Colorado State University in sunny Fort Collins, Colorado. For those of you who are unable to join us for our live broadcasts, we will be recording it for future viewing on our website. All of our Weather Talk webinars are sponsored by grants from the National Science Foundation and donations from listeners like you. Well, today we're going to talk about an exciting subject, that is Weather Underground. And here to talk with us about this amazing network of weather stations are Weather Underground founder, former hurricane hunter, and trombonist Jeff Masters. Joining him is a fairly new addition to the team, prolific weather author, I know I have many of his books on my shelf, former UCAR writer and editor, and Oklahoma native Bob Henson. You may be familiar with both of them for their terrific blogs each day on the Weather Underground site. Also joining us today on our question and answer section is Carrie Strenfeld. Carrie is the meteorologist and manager of the Personal Weather Station Network. Welcome, Jeff, Bob, and Carrie. It's great to have you with us today.
Well, thanks, Henry. We'll
and you guys are coming to us live here. Okay. We will pass it on to you there.
Okay. Well, thanks for that great introduction, Henry.
All right. Well, take it away.
I will do that. This is Dr. Jeff Masters. I was one of the co-founders of Weather Underground a moon ago. And I'll talk a little bit about the early history of Weather Underground and then pass it off to Bob to talk about the more recent history. And it all got its start way back in 1991, back in the early days of the internet. So Weather Underground really is kind of a pioneer in the field of internet services as far as weather goes. And it began when I went to PhD school back at the University of Michigan in 1991. I had just quit the hurricane hunters after nearly getting killed flying into Category 5 Hurricane Hugo. Figured it was a lot safer to sit behind a desk and do some science. So went back to PhD school, and as part of my curriculum, I took a class called Interactive Weather Computing under my advisor, Dr. Perry Sampson, who was actually an air pollution specialist. And I was working on my PhD in air pollution meteorology. But I got sidetracked by this really cool thing that I found about called the internet. Wow, the internet could connect you to just about any computer worldwide that pulled in all kinds of great science information. And we had a Sun workstation at our headquarters there on North Campus in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan that had a satellite dish that brought in all the world's weather information from Alden Electronics. It was a feed called NOAAPort, or is the predecessor for NOAAPort. And that Sun workstation had access to, like I said, all the weather data of the world. And it was so cool to be able to, just surf around and see what was going on everywhere in the world. And I thought that, hey, I should make this available to anybody on campus. So I wrote a little C program, the first C program I've ever written, and gave it a little menu interface so that anyone could type in a 3-letter airport code and get a weather forecast from the National Weather Service, or a weather observation if they were an international location. So here you can see the screen from that early program, which I called Weather, and it ran via a protocol called telnet. And at the top there you can see the command you would use to go in and get that weather forecast. It was running on a Sun workstation that had the name MADLAB, which was an acronym for Michigan Atmospheric Deposition Laboratory. And that computer resided in our little air pollution laboratory there on North Campus. So after I did that for everyone on campus, the people who ran the backbone, it was called Merit Networking Incorporated, and it was run out of Ann Arbor. They came to me and said, hey, if you attach this to a TCP IP port on a Unix machine, you could make this available to anyone on the entire internet. And I said, wow, that sounds cool. Tell me how to do that. And so they wrote a couple subroutines for me to do the handshaking and the networking commands. And they said, okay, you just give it a port number like 3000 and you put that on the end there, so you can see that on the command. And now not only did we have people on campus accessing my little weather program, we had people internationally starting to access it as well. And as the name for this little budding weather program, we decided to call it, well, how about Weather Underground? Because that was the radical wing of the Students for a Democratic Society, the student group that got its start at the University of Michigan back in the late 1960s. So Professor Sampson thought it would be a cute tongue-in-cheek reference to the radical group to have our little weather program known by the same name as the original Weather Underground. And you can see the usage curves here starting back in 1991 for this little weather program. We started off with a few thousand hits per week, and through strictly word of mouth it grew to be tens of thousands of hits per week as we went through the year in 1991. And you can see our big bump was through a hurricane, Hurricane Bob, which hit Long Island, a Category 2 storm back in the fall of 1991. That kind of got things really going. And then in 92, we added a second machine because the one machine was starting to get overloaded. And by the middle of 92, we were serving hundreds of thousands of pages per week. And the folks over at Merit Networking told me that this was the most popular service of any kind on the worldwide internet, my little menu-driven weather program. Strictly text-based. There were no graphics back then on the internet. And we decided to expand our little program by adding graphics. So here's a picture of that laboratory that I worked in. Like I said, we mostly did air pollution research here, but we quickly expanded into the education field. Perry Sampson issued a couple of very successful grant proposals to the National Science Foundation. We got several $1 million worth of funding to bring internet weather to the classroom, the K through 12 classroom in particular. So here's Professor Sampson and one of the other hirees, Jeff Ferguson, who was another co-founder of Weather Underground, working at a teacher workshop back in the early 1990s. So we brought in all kinds of teachers, hundreds of teachers, and trained them on how to do internet weather. And the National Science Foundation was really excited about this because it was a great way to push science through the internet. Because the internet is good at doing real time, and what science is more well suited for doing real time than weather, because weather is always happening right now. So NSF was happy, the university was happy, the teachers were, I don't know how happy they were because they had to learn things like PPP and TCP/IP. We spent more than half our time just getting them on the internet. It was really difficult back then in the days of 300 baud modems or 1200 baud modems if we were lucky. It was a real struggle. So we decided not to do just the plain old internet. We experimented around with direct access cable TV. We rented time on a satellite and tried to do a live show where we would talk in MadLab about the weather, and we actually hired a puppeteer and a comedian to help out with our little live weather broadcast that we did over community access cable TV. So I don't know if the National Science Foundation has ever funded a puppeteer and a comedian before, but we gave it a whirl. It wasn't really a success. There wasn't enough interaction, and it was too hard for, in real time for the classes to participate. I mean, we gave them dial-in numbers where they could ask questions or email. Now, there wasn't much interaction going on. It was still kind of too early. We were ahead of our time. And so we scrapped this idea of the community access cable, and we actually went to something called Gopher and started disseminating images over the internet using the Gopher protocol. This was before the World Wide Web. It was an alternative to the World Wide Web, and the two were in competition, and we were placing our bets that Gopher was going to be the next big way to transmit imagery over the internet. Well, it turned out that bet was wrong. It was WW that took over. So in 1995, when the World Wide Web finally went commercial, we decided to go commercial ourselves. And both with the support of the National Science Foundation and the University of Michigan Office of Technology Transfer, we incorporated as, well, we decided to keep the name Weather Underground. Why not? Yeah, name your business after a terrorist organization makes sense, right? Yeah. Particularly if, you've got companies out there, say, called Yahoo. I mean, yeah, this is the wild, wild west of the internet. and we were kind of loose and crazy and willing to take some chances. So with $2,000 of Perry Sampson's money, we bought our own Sun workstation and started making interactive imagery for instance, we did it for Al Gore's Globe project, was one of our first big clients. I put down a check there at the bottom, my invoice for the first money we ever made in 1995. I did some forecasting for a company. So we did some consulting, we did a little image creation, we did some internet work for schools, and we were kind of, just scratching away, trying to, keep ourselves afloat by just revenues. We didn't ever take venture capital. And slowly, over a period of a few years, we started getting some business. We launched our commercial version of the website, running the telnet session in 1996, and started doing advertising online in 97. And at that point, we had two of our former students, Alan Sterenberg and Chris Schwerzler, who were working on the educational project back in the early 90s. They were living out in Silicon Valley, where it really made sense to be able to put servers to do an internet business. In fact, it was probably the only place you could do servers where bandwidth was cheap enough to run an internet business. So the core of the business started developing in San Francisco because of the need to have the servers out there where bandwidth was cheap. And so we only had about 5 employees back in 97, us 5 co-founders, and we slowly added a few more, one by one, about 1 employee a year through the year 2000. And we got some press. I mean, here we are, written up in the Ann Arbor News back in 1997. We got in Wired magazine pretty early, I think in 98 or 99. And we actually got a couple offers to buy the company in the late 1990s. This was during the dot-com bubble. The Weather Channel wanted to buy us, and About.com wanted to buy us. But the trouble is these purchase offers came in the form of stock, which we figured was probably on the bubble side of things, and we never did really cut a deal to sell our company back then, and I'm glad we didn't, because the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. We cut everyone's salary by about 50% and barely survived into the year 2000. But survive we did, and part of that survival was maybe due to the fact that I was starting to write some interesting content for the website. I talked about my experiences flying into hurricanes. I developed a very cutting-edge sort of hurricane section for the website. I acted as kind of the system administrator, doing all the Unix work for the website, created all the imagery for our pages. And the website was starting to hold its own. We were getting some advertisers. That was the primary way that we would generate revenue. And we also made custom websites for people who wanted their own website. We would make them a weather website, and we called it an auto brand, and we would populate their web pages with automatically downloaded weather data. And through the early 2000s, we kept on growing, kept on adding people, and by about the year 2005, we probably had somewhere around 15 employees, and maybe 20, and we launched blogs. I thought this was a total waste of time. I was thinking, okay, blogging, the word sounds stupid. I mean, why do we want to do this? And I got talked into it by my coworkers. They were like, oh, come on, this is the latest thing, this is cool. And I was like, well, what do I write about? I don't know what to write about. And so this is my very first blog post. I wrote about rainbows. I took actually a picture of a rainbow. It's not well known, but a rainbow is actually a full circle. You just can't see the bottom part of it because it's below the horizon. And I had seen full circle rainbows from my weather research aircraft with the hurricane hunters. And here's a shot of as much as I could get into a 23mm lens of a full circle rainbow. So through April and May of 2005, I would post 2 blog posts a week, something like that. And I had trouble coming up with ideas. I mean, I didn't know what to do. But then the hurricane season of 2005 began in earnest in June, and I had lots to talk about. We had an unending barrage of, hurricane after hurricane, just a crazy year in the tropics. And the blog started getting a ton of attention, particularly when we started getting these Cat 5s. We had Dennis, we had Emily, and then along came Katrina in August. And I was telling people through my blog, hey, the governor is being an idiot. You got to get out of that city. You got to get out of New Orleans. And people were listening. People were reading the blog. It was very popular. And my co-blogger, Steve Gregory, who was a volunteer blogger at the time and is now still blogging for us, was beating the drum as well. And we got a lot of media attention. It's a good thing because we were really beating the drum when not enough people were. And the blogs were probably lifesavers for some people. I've heard a couple of people tell me that, after the fact, I'm so glad I read your blog because, boy, if we didn't take Katrina seriously and had stayed there, it would have been bad news. So the hurricane season of 2005 was, I was still blogging on New Year's Eve, as I recall, because we still had a tropical system out there, Zeta. And it really cemented my new role in the company. I kind of stopped doing so much system administration and became more of a blogger, which is pretty much purely what I do now. And if you've ever been to my blog, which I now share with Bob Henson, it's a pretty crazy world there on the comments section. You can see some great stuff, find some fantastic information. Some of the posts by the commenters are unbelievable, the amount of information you can get there. But we got trolls there too, and there's a lot of yelling whenever something goes up about climate change. Oh my gosh, climate change. Dr. Masters, how could you even mention the word? So, it is what it is. I talk about climate change maybe 1 out of 20 posts, but still I get a lot of grief for that. Mostly I talk about current weather events, but when there's a climate change event that needs to be talked about, I will talk about it, and you just got to roll with the punches, I guess. We do have a system of volunteer moderators that are active now in the comment section. They do an excellent job of controlling the trolls. It's still not perfect, but we've come a long way since the early days of the trolls taking over the comment section of the blog. And the comment section of the blog back in 2008, I'm proud to say, was the genesis of a disaster relief charity called Portlight. Here's where the Portlight charity got its start. In the wake of Hurricane Ike, a couple guys in the blog said, hey, let's load up a truck with supplies and go drive to the hard-hit areas of Texas and help out the people who the Red Cross is overlooking. And from that humble little start, the Portlight charity has now grown through years of work helping disabled people in the underserved, and is now recognized as probably the top disaster relief charity in the U.S. for disabled people. They've gotten grants of several $100,000 from various foundations and from the government, working closely with the Red Cross. And they have their own blog on Weather Underground. They're one of our featured blogs. There's their featured blog there on Weather Underground. And we have a number of other featured blogs there as well. Ricky Rude, who's been blogging with us for 7 to 8 years, does climate change stuff. He's a professor specializing in climate change at the University of Michigan. Steve Gregory, who I mentioned, is actively blogging for us. He does real-time weather right now, focusing on things like the 2-week outlook for North America. Marshall Shepard is on there, and we've also got Lee Grency from Penn State blogging for us. A lot of great featured blogs. So you can add your own blog there. I mean, anybody can come blog for us. It doesn't cost anything. You can start posting and tell people about, hey, I've got my own weather blog going on Weather Underground. That's what I like about our website. We're a community. It's not just, information flowing one way. We have a lot of people participating, sending us data or blogging for us, sending us photos. Our Wonder Photos is something I'm really proud of. We've got over 1.8 million of them. And we got personal weather stations as well, which we'll talk about a little bit more coming up here. So, things were going gangbusters through the early 2010s, and it became harder and harder to say no to some of the offers to buy the company that we were receiving. And finally, in 2012, we pulled the trigger and sold to the Weather Channel. So things have changed quite a bit since then. We had about 50 employees then. We still have about 50 now. They're all in San Francisco except for a few floaters like Bob, who's in Boulder, and myself, I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We closed down the finance section of the company, which was here in Ann Arbor, and the ad sales staff also were let go, but we kept all of our developers and meteorologists. So in the last 3 years, my role has changed a little bit. I did quite a bit of work for the Weather Channel. I became their primary climate change person and advised them on, the science behind climate change. I worked at a couple of their long-form programs, one called Tipping Points, where they talked about climate change, and a disaster series where I talked about various eclectic things, like what would happen if a rogue planet pulled the Earth out of its orbit, what would happen to the weather, kind of crazy stuff. And okay, well, here we are in 2016, and starting on Monday, IBM takes over the reins of Weather Underground, and we'll see how that goes. That will be another interesting ride. I plan to ride the rapids like I did for the purchase by the Weather Channel. I'm actually the only founder left of the original 5 that founded the company, still working for the company. And maybe later this year, you'll be able to see Weather Underground headquarters in San Francisco featured in a 3D movie called Hurricane, a Wind Odyssey. It's actually already been released in Europe. It's making the rounds of the art theaters or the art film festivals in the US. And I don't know, they're kind of wishy-washy on whether it's going to actually be released in the US or not. I don't think they have a distributor yet. But here's an example of Carrie, who's going to be on a little later talking to you, and myself doing a scene. And so we're not honing our acceptance speeches for the Oscars yet. Although that was a really bad take, probably one of the worst ones we did of the whole thing. We spent 4 days filming this movie in our studios in San Francisco, and supposedly it's going to be in 3D movie theaters later this spring. We'll see. Been kind of a crazy ride, and it got a little too crazy for me, so I decided I needed some help. Blogging had become more than a full-time job, especially due to the fact the weather's been so insane the last few years. I mean, it started in 2010 with, well, back then that was the hottest year on record, and the record heat wave in Russia, and the La Nina event then, and it's just been snowballing. And I don't need to tell you guys, it's been a little bit crazy out there the last few years, more than what one person can handle doing the blogs. So I brought in Bob Henson to help out, and he's been a lifesaver. I've actually cut down my hours, so I'm only working part-time. I'm a 20-hour-a-week employee, and Bob's full-time, so he's kind of the main blog guy, although during hurricane season we split things pretty equally. So Bob's been working very hard this month. He was kind of flying solo during Jonas the Blizzard last week. I was in Puerto Rico taking it easy, and it's been great to have him. And to tell you more about the last year or so under Bob's tenure here, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Henson, and I'll mute myself and let Henry and Noah take over here.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. That was really interesting, Jeff. And I guess Bob will be coming up here in a second. We'll have some questions. Folks, hold on to your questions till after the second half of the webinar.
Well, thanks very much, Jeff, and thanks, Henry. It's a really delight to be here. And I'm going to zoom ahead to where I think Jeff left off. Can you all see the screen? You should be seeing.
Looks good.
Great. Okay. Well, off we go. So I'm going to just talk a little bit, as Jeff indicated, about some new developments since I came on board about a year ago, and then tell a little bit about how you guys can get involved with your own personal weather stations in our network. So Carrie Strenfel will be joining us for that as well. So a couple of fun things that have happened since I came on board. Of course, the blogging has been a blast. I've really, really enjoyed it. And one thing I love that Jeff alluded to is the community participation. You know, we pretty much every blog we post gets several hundred comments a day, and we jump in here and there. But really, it's the community that does the heavy lifting on that. And There's lots of, interesting and sometimes heated discussion, but lots of fantastic information as well. So it's a great resource. So I encourage all of you who read the blogs to check out the comments as well. So in August, a very cool development happened involving the Weather Channel and Weather Underground. Basically, the Weather Channel decided they wanted to get more involved in an interactive version of their programming and kind of experiment with the different tones. So they arranged with us to have the Weather Underground take over the Weather Channel, and there are actually advertisements alluding to that. We interrupt this program. So for 2 hours every weekday from 6 to 8 Eastern Time, 4 to 6 Mountain Time, the Weather Channel becomes Weather Underground. And there was an entire set created for this. As you can see here, this is the sort of like the rec room basement environment. There's one of our Wunderground posters, Mamatis in the background, lots of screens. There's a bar and Barca loungers. On the left is Mike Bettis, on the right, Sarah Dillingham, and they are both regular co-hosts. And in the center is Tom Nizzle, the Weather Channel's winter weather expert. And so the format lends itself to a lot of discussion, a lot of geeking out in a very loose and formal way. Jeff and I have both appeared a number of times. Typically, I'd say about once a week to twice a week, one of us is on there. Jeff was just on a couple days ago to talk about the billion-dollar weather disasters of 2015, which is a blog post he recently did. So this has been a neat development, and I'm happy to say that even though the Weather Channel is not coming over to IBM, there is a content sharing agreement. So the Weather Underground show will continue on the Weather Channel as it has been. So I encourage you to check it out. If you don't have cable TV, you can go to the web link shown here, wunderground.com/WUTV, and there you will find clips from the show that are uploaded typically the day after, but still pretty relevant. A lot of them are pretty evergreen topics, and once in a while there will be live programming on there as well, and there's a chat function too, so check that out. Let's see. So another thing that has really taken off the last year is what we call Wunderground Live, and that is our live blogging function that we've ramped up. We've done about 21 of these over the last 9 or 10 months, and each one has run about a day or two and focused on a major weather event, whether it be a hurricane approaching the U.S. or a major winter storm or a large-scale severe weather outbreak, typically one that's either a moderate or high risk. So we've had a lot of fun. Sean Tanner, a meteorologist at Weather Underground, and I have pretty much focused on this, on getting this ramped up. And readership has gone up, which we're happy to see. Our Jonas live blog set a record so far. And here are 3 examples of what we posted during Jonas. It's anything from model output to interesting statistics and factoids to webcam pictures. So this is another fun spot to go to when a storm is evolving. And as always with our blogs, you can contribute, you can post comments and the like. So the URL is at the bottom. When we have a live blog going, all you need to do is just go to the Weather Underground homepage and there will be a banner directing you to the live blog. So I'd like to conclude here with a few slides about how you can join us and be part of Weather Underground. And I'd like to emphasize that this is something you can do in addition to CoCoRaHS. We definitely are not trying poach anybody from CoCoRaHS. I'm a huge CoCoRaHS fan ever since Boulder became the 2nd county in the nation to be part of CoCoRaHS. So we would love you to also participate in Weather Underground with a personal weather station, and that way your observations can be fed automatically through the internet, as Jeff was describing, into our website and to the world at large, so everyone can see essentially the weather going on in your neighborhood. But of course, we want to encourage you to keep doing what you do for CoCoRaHS, because it's such a crucial part of monitoring and observing and analyzing the big precip events we get around the country and locally. So what is a PWS? I suspect most of you know, but for those who don't, a personal weather station is really just what it sounds like, a set of instruments, typically coordinated and arranged so that they can be fed electronically into a computer or some other electronic environment. Typical readings, as you would guess, temperature, humidity, pressure, wind speed, rainfall. But any of these constellations of instruments can be set up in its own way, so you'll see quite a variety out there. But when you have one of these, as we'll explain, you can hook it up and bring it into our system. So we started in a formal way our PWS network in 2004, so it's been a little over 10 years now. and the network has grown very rapidly. It's really been valuable in filling in some of those gaps in various parts of the country, especially between airports and ASOS type stations. And it's actually been used to help improve our forecasts, as I'll describe. So here is a rough sense of where we have stations. We're now over 180,000 worldwide. Very exciting. The number has really just grown by leaps and bounds in the last year or two. This includes about 2,000 ASOS stations and maybe 10,000 other types of public stations. But most of the 180,000 is personal weather stations, and they range from Net Atmos stations, Davis, Ambient, Oregon, Rainwise, AccuRide, La Crosse, and even some Blue Sky stations now. So pretty wide variety. We'll bring just about anything into the network as long as you're interested in setting it up and picking it in. And once you do that, you'll be able to have your observations as part of a map like this, which is a map of downtown central Denver showing all the observations that are part of our network. And you can click on this and get the full records for those stations, whatever they may be. So this is a really fun way to get a really detailed sense of what's going on in a location. So how does this relate to forecasting? Well, in 2011, so about 5 years ago, Weather Underground launched something called Best Forecast, which is essentially blending several different of the major models. I believe GFS and Euro are both in there, but I don't know exactly, and I shouldn't even say if I did. So it's a blend of models, but also combines with an algorithm that was developed at Weather Underground to give us our own best forecast that is made available to you on the web, on your smartphone. And you can see an example on the right of what this might look like on your phone. So I've called up the forecast for Louisville. So not only do you get the worded forecast, which you see at the bottom, as well as icons, but you get a nice trace showing the day-to-day progress of temperatures. And I really like this because, for example, if it's a day where you're going to get a high early in the day, it really comes through vividly on this portrayal. So these forecasts are developed not only with the algorithms, but folding in all the personal weather station data and then tweaking it on a neighborhood basis. So the data that's provided through the PWSs actually helps to make the forecast even better than it would otherwise be. So I mentioned a variety of different manufacturers of weather stations. We have a buying guide to help you sift through these choices, and it's really helpful. It provides some tips on who a particular station is suited for, the instruments that are part of it. We give ratings for different aspects of the instruments. Because as you know, $100 station is going to perform differently than a $1,000 station. But we welcome any and all participants. And I should point out that part of the algorithm that we use includes cross-checking stations with their neighbors. And that really helps us to spot any outliers. So there is a lot of quality control that goes into that side of things. So there's the URL for the buying guide, and again, these will be part of the PDF that CoCoRaHS will be uploading after the talk. So I don't have to tell you that where you put your station really makes a difference. Location matters. So we have a few tips on that, and these will be super familiar to any of you that have mounted rain gauges to snowboards. When you join the network, after you get your PWS set up and installed, we have got a handy guide to help you figure out how to get an ID. So once you join Weather Underground, you'll have your own ID and you'll be able to link your data. And then you'll start getting a personalized forecast, and your PWS will show up on our maps. For those of you that may have not have a home computer, a laptop, or desktop, good news, you can participate through something called WeatherBridge. It was developed for Davis stations, but it works for many other types of stations as listed here. Basically, it enables your PWS to talk directly to Wunderground. Essentially, it goes through the bridge and onto Wunderground, so you don't have to mess with hooking it up to your computer. It uses, again, the WeatherBridge device and the WeatherLink software. And I believe AirBridge is a wireless version of that. WeatherBridge uses a USB cable. So this makes the process even easier. You'll definitely want to check if you're looking at PWSs to see if it includes the WeatherBridge, if that's something you want to use. So once you have your data, feeding to Weather Underground, this is the kind of graphic that you'll be able to generate and view, and others will as well. Really, really detailed, fine-grained plots of temperature, dew point, winds, wind direction, even solar radiation if you have a station that includes that. These are so cool to look at, and there's many, many of these out there, obviously. So we're even working on a system that will notify you by text or email when observations hit certain thresholds, when you have rain in the forecast. Already you can be notified by email for warnings and such, but we're looking forward to this new addition, which is in development now. So finally, this is something Jeff mentioned earlier, but something I might really, really enjoy taking part in is our WonderPhoto collection. As Jeff mentioned, more than 1.8 million photos contributed to date, dozens to hundreds added every day. And a lot of them have to do with current weather events, but there's also just beautiful photos of the incredible world around us. So we encourage you to participate. Again, like the blogs, you can comment on the photos. And so it's a really nice way to have a dialogue with other people interested in photography. And if you put a really cool picture up there, you're sure to get some kudos from other people who appreciate great photography and great weather. So there's the URL for that. And I can't turn it over to Q&A without doing the obligatory author's book slide, so please forgive me for this. But these are 3 books that I have out now. The first one is actually the history of broadcast meteorology, as the subtitle indicates, Weather on the Air. I started putting this together in graduate school, and it finally became an AMS book in 2010. And it's filled with all kinds of anecdotes and stories that are pretty hard to find anywhere else, because I was dismayed in writing this to find that nobody had really done this history. A lot of TV stations just had kind of left things sitting in boxes or thrown stuff out. So I talked to dozens and dozens of the pioneers. One example, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Don Kent, who's a legend in Boston weathercasting. He actually saw the blizzard of 1938, or rather the hurricane of 1938, and I got to talk to him about that in 2008, 2009. So you might enjoy that. Also, The Thinking Person's Guide to Climate Change, paperback. It was originally called The Rough Guide to Climate Change. I went through 3 editions, and now is an AMS book. And finally, Meteorology Today. This is something that I've become co-author of in the last couple of years. Some of you may have used this if you took meteorology as an undergraduate in college. It's one of the more common Meteorology 101 textbooks. And Don Aaron started it in 1982, and he's now brought me on as a co-author. So I'm really enjoying that as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Carrie and Jeff and I will now be happy to take your questions, and we'll talk further.
Thanks, Bob. That's some great stuff there. Appreciate you showing us. We have a link on our website to Bob's books, as well as all the other links that he's shown on there. So you guys will be able to take a look at that after the webinar. In fact, while you guys were presenting, I went ahead and downloaded the app on my phone, and it is really cool. So if you haven't done that yet, and you're out there listening in today, Weather Underground, just get it from your app store, and it's pretty neat. Well, we've got a bunch of questions coming in, and we'll start off here with Lois in Canada, in Ontario. She wants to know, do you take, and you did mention this, do you take data from other countries? So how do they do that? Just like you're in the U.S. loading up your information?
I believe so, Carrie. Isn't that true?
Let me unmute myself here. Can you hear me okay now?
You sound good.
Okay. The over 180,000 personal weather stations across the world. Yes, that includes, the majority internationally would be Europe, but we do have some data coming in from, South America, Central America. Africa is pretty sparse, and Asia is a little bit sparse as well. But yeah, we definitely have international stations, and they work similarly. Your weather station either connects to your computer or something like the Weather Bridge, and it just pushes data over the router to the internet and gets your data right on Weather Underground.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question coming in, and some of these might be kind of technical, so hopefully, again, if we can't answer or you guys can't answer them here, we can follow up with an email. Tom writes, and he wants to know, he has a Pete Brothers altimeter or unimeter 2100 station. Do you accept that into your program?
Yes, we actually do have a couple of Pete Brothers stations in our network. It's not one of the common stations, but we definitely have it, and we can figure out a way to get that data online.
Thanks. Here's a question from Ron. And Ron said, what is the difference between Weather Underground and the Citizens Weather Observation Program? He says he submits his PWS to both, but what is the difference?
Gosh, go ahead, Carrie. Yeah.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
Well, you know more than I do. I believe they're complementary but separate, right?
Yeah, in most weather station software, you can upload data to both, and they are complementary. Usually people actually do upload to both, and the only difference really is that Weather Underground would give you a forecast for your location or for your weather station. I don't believe that Citizens Weather allows that or has that feature. And as far as with Weather Underground, you can access your data from any of our apps and have a forecast there as well. So from any device makes it a little bit easier.
Okay, Grant writes he's in Manitoba, and he wants to know, will you continue TV, the broadcast via Periscope? Are you familiar with that?
No, I guess I'm not familiar with that. I guess you could send me a question directly over email if we want to sort that out.
Yeah, we haven't used Periscope very much, but it's something we're aware of. And I know the Weather Channel has used it on occasion as part of the Weather Underground TV show.
Okay, here's one from Rob, and I was wondering this too. I know I'll sometimes with my Roku, I'll bring up Weather Underground, and there's a place where you can actually see a picture of the sky in that area. And so he wants to know, can Weather Underground ingest data from Bloom Sky stations?
Yes, actually, that's one of our newest features in the Personal Weather Station Network. Now Bloom Skies are compatible, so I can definitely send you the information on that, on how to do so. There's a link directly with Bloom Sky that you enter your Weather Underground station ID and password, and you can get your data and your webcam data images up on Weather Underground.
Okay, Carl is writing in. He has a satellite internet with limited bandwidth data, and he wants to know how much bandwidth does a PWS require to link to Weather Underground?
Well, usually it definitely depends on the upload interval. It wasn't mentioned in this presentation, but we allow for rapid fire updates, which are every 2 to 3 seconds. But that requires a higher bandwidth. So the option for situations where you have a little bit slower internet, you could use 15-minute or 15 to 30-minute uploads is just fine. So that's usually what people do.
Okay, Jim writes in, and if you mentioned this earlier, but if you could go over this again, Bob, how to become part of the PWS system. He has a LaCrosse 2813 wireless system and was interested to see how he can become part.
Well, the web links that I presented, you'll find in the PDF, will get you there. If you just go to wunderground.com, and one of the pull downs is Personal Weather Station, and that should get you rolling. Carrie, any other tips? Or?
Yeah, with the LaCrosse, most people use, and I can send you can find all of the different software that works with other weather stations, or with every weather station online, on one of our FAQ links there in the sidebar. But I could definitely send it directly. LaCrosse, most people use, it's called the Weather Underground Heavy Weather Uploader. It's a long name, and it's pretty easy to find if you Google it. It's the Woohoo software. with lacrosse is usually what people use, but I can send that directly as well.
Great. Here's one from Hamilton in Taos, New Mexico. And he says there's a personal weather station about 2 miles away. Is it useful to have a second station so close?
Yeah, as a meteorologist, I think yes. It's great to capture microclimates, and as we know, when you go for a walk in your neighborhood, you can feel the temperature change and the winds change, and that's exactly why we have a personal weather station network to capture, these small-scale weather changes and hopefully improve our forecast for those.
Here's one from Dale in South Dakota, and he says it gets pretty cold up there, so he covers the rain collector on his personal weather station. Does the lack of data diminish the value of the other data?
No, definitely not. All data is considered separately, and I guess he would do that just for the winter, for the dealing with ice and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, all data is great data for us.
And we also could recommend that you could take CoCoRaHS measurements with that as well by taking the funnel out and collecting the side by side there. Here's one for Jeff. Jeff Ray from Missouri wants to know if you can get a little more about the story of what happened to you in Hurricane Hugo. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we were at 1,500 feet on the NOAA P3 flying into the eye wall of Hurricane Hugo. We were expecting it to be a Category 3 storm when we got there. Unfortunately, there was only one ghost bird in the sky that year, which meant that it didn't give a very straight down the eye look at the storm and gave us a false sort of intensity estimate for the hurricane. We were the first plane out there. There were no other, data points to go, so we said, well, okay, we'll go with the satellite data. We think it's Cat 3. Normally, you don't want to go into a major hurricane at that low an altitude, particularly if it's a Cat 5. But once you hit the eye wall, you're committed, and we got into the eye wall of the storm, and the winds quickly rose to Cat 5. It was only a 2-minute voyage across that eye wall into the eye, but during those 2 minutes, we got hammered pretty good. I mean, we started hitting 0 Gs and 2 Gs, so stuff started flying around the cabin a little bit. And by the time we got about a minute and a half into the storm, we were hitting 3 Gs and -1 Gs, so we're really getting slammed around, and we're getting pretty concerned that the airplane's not going to hold together maybe. But finally it started to lighten up out there. We were getting close to the eye where it's calm and the sun is shining. But right at that moment we hit the most intense burst of turbulence any hurricane hunter has ever hit and survived. We hit 5.7 Gs in the downward direction, -3.2 in the upward direction. Pilot lost control of the aircraft. We had the number 3 engine catch on fire at that moment, and we started plunging down towards the ocean. Well, the inside of the cabin was a maelstrom. I mean, our 200-pound life raft broke loose, hit the ceiling, bent the bar on the ceiling, crashed down, fortunately missed everyone. The tool chest that the engineers used broke open, and there were screwdrivers and hammers flying around. Again, luckily nobody got hit. Back in the galley, the cooler broke loose, and there were knives and forks and cans of soda and ice flying around. And I don't want to talk about what happened in the toilet, but it was a disaster. And, we were extremely fortunate nobody got injured by all the flying debris in the cabin. But we were close enough to the calm eye that when we started getting pretty close to the ocean, we suddenly hit calm weather. The pilot pulled us out at 880 feet above the waves and was able to put out the fire in a number 3 engine. But the story didn't end there, because here we were in the eye of a Category 5 hurricane with only 3 engines, barely made it in the storm with 4 engines, so now we had to get home. So what we did is we orbited the eye of the storm to climb higher to find a safer, less turbulent altitude to emerge from the storm, but ran into 3 problems. Number 1 is you can't climb very high on 3 engines, particularly when you're banked over at a 30-degree angle, which we had to do to stay in the eye because it was so tight. It was just a 10-mile diameter storm. Plus the fact it was a low-pressure system, which means there's less air, less lift. It was only about a 9-15 millibar central pressure there, so you're losing 10% of your lift. So we chucked out all of our scientific probes, $10,000 worth of dropsondes and AXBTs, chucked out half of our bag of fuel into the ocean, and hey, we were able to get to, well, 6,000 feet, which ain't so good considering that aircraft normally can get to 26,000 feet. So we were resigned to the fact we'd have to get out of that storm at 6,000 feet, which is still none too safe. But fortunately, we had a helper. An Air Force aircraft came in the storm at that altitude, 6,000 feet, and did multiple penetrations of the eye wall to find a soft spot for us. They got hammered pretty good, not as bad as we got hammered because they missed what we hit, which was a mesoscale vortice that was stuck in the eye wall. And eventually they found a soft spot on the north side. Then we followed them out, landed back in Barbados, and that was my last flight with the Hurricane Hunters.
Wow, that is quite a story. Have they ever lost a plane before during all these Hurricane Hunters? You know?
NOAA has never lost a plane. The last time a plane was lost was in 1974 in the Pacific. There have actually been 5 Hurricane Hunter planes that have gone down, 1 in the Atlantic and 5 in the Pacific. And Hurricane Janet, a Cat 5 in 1955, was the only Atlantic storm to claim a plane. And that was a Navy plane that was flying in at 700 feet below the clouds, because back then we didn't have the navigation instruments to, tell you where you were. So they flew in under the clouds and looked at the surface of the water to try and figure out, which direction the wind was blowing and how to get in the eye. And it's not a far stretch of the imagination to picture a downdraft that splashed them right in the ocean. 700 feet is not very high.
Wow. We just got a message here from one of our listeners. Carl says, after that story, I'll never fly again, he just said. So let you know.
Airplanes are built safe, though. Come on. My wife's always clutching my arm when we hit a little bit of turbulence. I'm like, oh, come on, this is nothing.
Do you go to amusement parks anymore, or is that the end of that?
The thrill has vanished. I do not enjoy amusement parks anymore. Sad to say.
Okay, thanks. Hey, here's a question. A couple people have written in, and they want to know about the IBM purchase of Weather Underground. What are they going to do with the information, and what are their plans now that they're going to be the new owners?
We're in the Watson division, and Watson is their kind of artificial intelligence division, and they've got big plans to take these 170,000 personal weather stations and do some really fine-scale weather forecasting. And this is the kind of computing power that you need to do that. I mean, you need the world's most sophisticated computers to do weather forecasts. I mean, whenever they do new, latest and greatest, most powerful computer in the world, what do they send it to do? Weather forecasts. I mean, that's kind of the most computer-intensive application you can give to a computer. So they're going to try and do some new things with weather forecasting. IBM's been very interested in doing weather for decades. I mean, back in the 1980s, one of my PhD students I graduated with, he went to work for IBM right away and did some modeling for them, weather modeling. So they've always been very interested in this. I think it makes sense to have a tech company doing internet weather because it is so data rich and there's a lot of room for some creative work to be done.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for answering that one. David writes in, and he says, do you filter uploaded data for station failures? He says his Oregon unit quits several times a day. Should he wait to sign up until he replaces it?
I'm not sure what the question was. It was the station failed, maybe?
Right. I guess his station or his unit quits working a couple times a day. So should he wait to get until he gets a new one to sign up, or can he sign up with that and have I guess blanks in the record?
Oh, actually, yeah, that is a good question. The station, if it's sending bad data or not sending data at all, it would likely fail our QC process. And then, once it's failing the QC, the station, your PWS dashboard is available. You can see the data and you can see, your bad data, but the station is actually removed from our site across the maps and across any apps or any other of our web pages that show personal weather stations, because we actually try not to show any bad data across our site and our apps.
And a follow-up or another question on that, Bob wants to know how do you take care of the outliers, bad calibrations? Do you notify the station? How do you help them?
We're actually working right now. We only send emails when your station is offline and not reporting to Weather Underground. And we've played with emailing when your station fails QC. But we're sorting out the best way to do that, and we're actually kind of working on ways to make a whole dashboard available to just the personal weather station owner so they can see, when their station's failing, when it's passing just fine. But that wouldn't be, so they can work on their station and work on calibrating what sensors need to be calibrated, but that wouldn't be available to everyone across the website, just the station owner.
Hey, Kari, if let's say some of your equipment is not working, like the humidity sensor, but other pieces of it are, is the current mode to throw out all the data, or to flag all the data, or just the instruments that aren't working?
Well, currently, temperature, relative humidity, and pressure are the main three sensors that need to be working in order for your station to be, passing in all aspects as far as getting your station on the apps and on the site. But the question where if my rain bucket, isn't working for the winter, currently we're considering rain and wind data extra. But as a meteorologist, I consider that very important information that needs to be included. But yeah, so right now the three are the main ones. So yeah, if say humidity is not working, it would likely be flagged for QC.
Bob, here's a question for you coming from John from Texas, and he's referring to your broadcast meteorology book. He's always wondered where the format came from, the news first, followed by weather, followed by sports. Any insights from your research in writing the book?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know for sure if radio sequenced things in that way, but certainly as early as the late 40s, early 50s, that format was in place. And interestingly, until the 1970s, on many stations, if not most, they were actually separate programs. I remember growing up in Oklahoma City, the news would run from, I think, 6 o'clock to 6:15, and the weather from 6:15 to 6:25, and the sports from 6:25 to 6:30, and the anchors never talked to each other. So you wouldn't get a direct conversation between, say, the news anchor and the weather anchor. That all changed in the 1970s with the advent of what was called happy news, kind of pejoratively, but that's where they decided that the anchors should all be like a team or a family and interact with each other on the air, and that's pretty much the format that's persisted ever since then. But I don't know how the format actually began in terms of that ordering. I would guess, it makes sense to start out with news, and then after the news, a lot of news is about weather, so I guess that would be a natural follow-on. Although there are markets and have been markets where sports came before the weather. I don't think that happens very much anymore, though.
Great, thanks for answering that one. Dave writes and wants to know where you can get a weather bridge for existing PWS users.
Yeah, you can order it online directly from Ambient, but yeah, the link is available from our buying guide.
And Bruce writes in and he wants to know if you're away from your station, say on vacations and so forth, should you shut down the station?
It's really up to you. If it's dependent on a computer, that computer needs to be on 24/7 for your data to be sent to Weather Underground, to be published on Weather Underground. If you want to keep that computer on and you're okay with that while you're gone, that's fine. If you have the weather bridge set up or something where it doesn't require a computer, that's easier because usually people's routers remain on while they're gone. So it's definitely a personal choice.
Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Can you guys stay with us for a couple more minutes? We have a lot of questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but we're also going to ask if you could follow up. Some of these are more technical and might be best just via email.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so Ron wants to know in a little more detail, how does the personal weather station help forecasting?
I can take that. What's great about the more weather data you have, the more current conditions you can feed into the models, and then when you get model outputs, you have more data, and so you can get forecasts for locations where those current conditions are coming in.
Okay, great. Well, we've got other ones on here. Let's see. Dave in Arizona, do you support Brian Hamilton's weather display? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah.
I could look into it for that.
Yeah, we could look it up offline if you want after the webinar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and here's a listener just starting out. Can you recommend a good starting point for a novice? So books, websites. What would be good for a novice getting into weather and with the weather station?
The weather station really depends on your price point and whether you want to rely on a computer or not. And I'd be happy to work with anybody to help figure out the best station for them.
I'd like to add, Carrie and I were chatting about this. I guess the higher end systems do get better data, and I believe they tend to last longer too. Isn't that right?
Yeah, definitely. The Rainwise and Davis stations, you can definitely count on lasting over 5 years. The lower end stations that are, the $100 to $200 range, unfortunately, the sensors start to skew after 6 to 9 months or a year. So those stations you really have to keep an eye on and calibrate as often, definitely once a year calibrate. But just something to watch out for.
Yeah, so that's certainly an option, is to start with one of those if you're just getting in and want to get your feet wet, and then that can help you figure out what kind of station if you wanted to upgrade at a later point. There's certainly a ton of great websites out there on weather. There's a lot of resources at Weather Underground. Certainly our blog, I think, has a lot of stuff that you might find interesting, and it's archived. We have an index on the right that archives by topic and by date every blog that Jeff and I have done, and guest posters as well, going back to 2005. So that's a pretty handy resource, I think. My former employer, UCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, has some great FAQs on weather and climate that are good starting points. So there's a lot out there, and I'll be happy to provide some other tips by email after we're done.
Bob Edwin writes, and if you could go over this again, this question is, can you see where other personal weather PWS observers are located in your neighborhood? And how would you do that?
Is that for Bob, or should I take that, Bob?
I'll go for it, Carrie.
Okay, sure, yeah. If you're familiar with our website, you can go from our homepage. You can see a map of your location with all the weather stations, and I think there was a slide of that that Bob showed. Otherwise, you can check the Wunder map with personal weather station layer turned on, and you can zoom in pretty close and just kind of snoop around your neighborhood and see where there's weather stations, and if your location would be a nice spot to fill in the gap there.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Once you get in there and mess with the map, you'll see pretty quickly how that works.
Okay, great. We've got a couple more coming in here. Give me a second here. We'll get them as they're coming in. So it sounds as though the person here, Ingo, is writing in that sounds like a PWS can be fully automated, more so than a CoCoRaHS. So can you just to describe what a personal weather station does and how it connects and what's the difference between having a personal weather station? Does that automatically all get ingested over the web? How does that work?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So usually it's a personal weather station, like Bob mentioned, is a bunch of different sensors, all usually packaged into one device, and that can connect usually wirelessly. There's still some old cable units, usually wirelessly to something like your computer or something like a weather bridge device that connects to your router, and everything can be configured there on your computer or within the weather bridge, and you're able to, since it's connected right there to the router, all that weather data gets pushed online and gets pushed to Weather Underground.
And one of the nice things about that is depending on which station you have, you can see data on a basically minute by minute basis, and then through Weather Underground you can plot and chart those, and other people can as well. So you're able to see, for example, when precipitation started and ended with a really nice precision that I think complements the data that you gather manually every day through CoCoRaHS.
Right, and also as far as what I mentioned about upload times, stations upload, airports usually only give us data every hour on the hour, but personal weather stations on Weather Underground, we allow for rapid fire updates every 2 to 3 seconds, but you can also, for lower bandwidth, you can allow for 15-minute updates or 30-minute updates. It's really up to the user.
Okay, Thomas writes in, he wants to know, are the stations you use compatible with ham radio? In other words, are the stations protected from close RF radio transmissions?
I believe so. I believe we have some users that participate in both.
Okay, we're going to wind it up here. Just a couple more questions. Ted wants to know why dew point is not requested. Is that the reason for that?
I think dew point, correct me, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, dew point is requested. I'm sorry, that's the confusion. Yeah, you can, most software calculates the dew point based on your relative humidity sensor, but some stations have a temperature dew point probe. So we pull in both relative humidity and dew point and display all of that. But the only thing is usually there's only one sensor, relative humidity or dew point, and the other is calculated from that sensor and temperature.
Right.
Okay, here's one coming in that how is a personal weather station powered? Does it require batteries or plug in, or how do you what happens with those?
Some of the older units are still powered, with a cable, but most nowadays are solar panels or have a solar panel, solar powered, and also have a battery. So that solar power charges the battery for overnight, and for the northern latitudes in the winter months.
What would you expect? I know you mentioned that there's $100 and $200 starter ones. So for somebody to get a good personal weather station, what would they kind of expect to pay with the solar and so forth on that?
I mean, I prefer unfortunately the higher end stations. The Davis, that's $300-400. Well, for $300 to $500 are the good quality Davis stations. Those give us the best data for longer, and that's what I prefer. But there is an ambient station that is also very good for just over, I think it's close to $300. It's just over $200, so that would also be a good station to get.
Gee, we should have aired this program just before Christmas when folks were looking for presents. But Valentine's Day is only 2 weeks away, so there you go. You might be able to get a good Valentine's gift. Okay, we're gonna wind it up with the last question here for today. And again, thank you for taking the time to give the presentation and just to talk with us. We've got some questions that weren't answered on the air, and if you guys wouldn't mind following up with them, some are pretty technical, and we'll send those. These guys will get back to you out there in the next week or two with the answers. But here's one, and this is an interesting one. How useful are measurements of wind speed and direction at ground level? He says when houses are causing change in wind patterns. So how high above ground level should you mount your weather station, your anemometer?
Yeah, definitely. If you can, the higher the better for wind measurements. Or if you have, something like a big open field to place your station in, that would be ideal. But we have all of the specifications, the siting specs online that we are ideal conditions, and you can look that over.
Okay, well, thank you, all of you. I want to thank Bob and Carrie and Jeff for this great Weather Talk webinar. We're going to have it recorded, and you'll be able to pull it up. The slides are also there from the talks. They'll be on the website as well. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today.
Our pleasure.
All right. You're welcome.
And for folks out there, we want you to mark your calendars and join us for our next Weather Talk webinar. That's coming up on Thursday, February 25th. We're going to talk about outdoor weather safety, and we're going to feature the National Weather Service's National Decision Support Services Program Manager. Wow, it's a long title. Charlie Woodrum, and very interesting about stadiums and so forth and what they're doing to promote weather safety during outdoor events. So finally, when signing off today, please take that short survey. It's going to pop up on your screen. And so until next time, this is Henry Regis for the rest of the CoCoRaHS team here saying goodbye for now and have a great afternoon.